January 31, 1923, The Glasgow Herald, Glasgow, Scotland. Royal Mummies. Symbolism of their burial by Professor G. Elliott Smith, Doctor of Letters, FRS. In my previous articles, I have called attention to the aims which the ancient Egyptians kept so persistently in view in constructing and furnishing the tombs of their kings. The pharaoh's body was embalmed to make sure of the continuation of his existence beyond the grave. The conviction that this object was really attained when the mummy was made and housed in an imperishable building induced them to furnish the tomb lavishly and to provide an ample store of food to sustain him and give him all the comforts and luxuries to which he was accustomed when he was living upon earth. But to make doubly sure, they inscribed upon the walls of his tomb, upon his sarcophagus and coffins, and on papyri placed on the tombs, certain texts to make clear his identification with Osiris, with the practical object of ensuring that he should share the fate of the god and attain the immortality which the god had secured. Moreover, other devices were adopted to make the issue more certain. Of the objects found, an association with the mummies of Egyptian kings of the 18th dynasty, to which definite cultural importance was attached, none is more remarkable than the so-called germinating Osiris. Several examples of this singular symbol were found in the tombs of Tutankhamun's predecessors as far back as Amenhotep II, 1420 BC, and, as it was observed in its fullest development, in the tomb of his successor, Horemheb, 1315 BC, it is more probable than not that Tutankhamun's will also be similarly equipped. It consists of a shallow box about 5 foot long, shaped so as to represent the god Osiris, wearing a crown and holding the crook and whip in his hands. By means of wooden partitions, the features of the head, the necklace, and the arms are represented. This shallow box was filled with earth, in which barley was planted. When it germinated and the sprouts had attained 2 or 3 inches in height, a closely fitting lid was fastened onto the box by wooden pegs. The lid is slightly sculpted on round boss and painted yellow. The details of the body and the ornaments are indicated in relief, the effect of which is heightened by lines of black and red. The symbolism expressed in this remarkable procedure was in keeping with motives which were explained in my earlier article. The identification of the dead king with Osiris, who was himself a dead king, whose magical powers as the bestower of renewed life and a continuation of existence after death, symbolized by the germinating barley. But the procedure was richly charged with the deepest religious significance. In the first of this series of articles, I explained that the whole of the burial customs of the early Egyptians and the dramatic ritual which formed part of the tomb ceremonies were inspired by the desire to ensure the prolongation of existence. The body was made imperishable and protected by every means the relatives could devise. It was supplied with abundance of food and all the necessities of life, and, above all, the germinating Osiris was there to complete the process and perpetually to animate and prolong the existence of the corpse. If its potency was derived from the reproduction of the form of Osiris, an equally vital part of its supposed magical power was due to the fact that it consisted of barley in the act of producing new life. As the earliest cereal that was cultivated and the staple diet of the earliest civilized people, and the chief factor in creating their civilization, barley came to occupy a peculiarly distinctive role in early belief. It was the staff of life and the material from which beer was made. Form assumed by a grain of barley led to the assimilation of its life-sustaining with definitely life-giving functions. It was identified with the Great Mother as a life-giver, in her form as Hathor or Isis, and the Corn Mother acquired the reputation of being able to prolong existence in other ways than providing food and drink. The coffin texts of the Middle Kingdom, circa 2000 BC, translated by M. Laco, referred to the identification of the deceased with Osiris and barley, and in the pyramid texts, many centuries earlier, the dead king is represented as making the following claim: I am Osiris, I live as the gods, I live as grain, I grow as grain, I am barley. Professor Breasted's translation. Just as the Nile, which was personified as Osiris, conveyed new life to the grains of barley by irrigating them, so the god was supposed to be able to grant a new lease of existence to the dead. February 3rd, 1923, the Glasgow Herald, Glasgow, Scotland. Decay in the Tomb, the disintegration of textile fabrics. The Times World Copyright by arrangement with the Earl of Carnarvon. By Mr. A. Lucas, Director, Chemical Department, Egyptian Government. A notable feature of the contents of the tomb of Tutankhamun was the marked discoloration of most of the textile fabrics, which varied in color from light brown to very dark brown, and was accompanied by partial disintegration. The discoloration and disintegration were not uniformly distributed, even on the same article, one portion being much discolored and badly decayed, while another portion of the same fabric, exposed to similar conditions, was much less discolored and in a much better state of preservation. The precise cause of this phenomenon has not been determined, but it is undoubtedly a process of oxidation, probably assisted by the dryness and warmth of the tomb atmosphere. It is a process of slow, spontaneous combustion, but one which would never become so accelerated as to cause flame. I am informed by Mr. Howard Carter that in his experience he has found that where a tomb, favorably situated so far as dryness of position was concerned, had not been opened for robbery or other purposes, say fabrics present have been invariably in a good state of preservation. In cases, however, in which the tomb had been entered, although afterwards reclosed, the fabrics were in a much poorer state of preservation. This might be accounted for by assuming that the oxygen in the air originally present was not in sufficient amount to cause much damage. But when more air, and consequently more oxygen, was admitted, the oxidation effects increased. The only treatment the textile fabrics are receiving at the present time is to enable them to bear transport to Cairo. They are unwrapped, measured, described, and, if necessary, treated with a preservative solution, and are then carefully packed. But all this is purely preliminary, since detailed and final description and treatment are impossible in the desert. February 3rd, 1923, the Glasgow Herald, Glasgow, Scotland. In the Days of Tutankhamun. Dr. H.R. Hall had an overflowing audience at Burlington House, London, last evening when he lectured on the world in the time of Tutankhamun. The Egypt Exploration Society, he said, were carrying out excavations at El Amarna and were finding interesting remains of the civilization which existed in the time of Tutankhamun, and he hoped subscriptions would be forthcoming to enable that work to be carried on. Tutankhamun's father-in-law, Akhenaten, was a crank in religion and also a pacifist, a man of extraordinarily high ideals, who purposely allowed his foreign empire to go to ruin. He probably brought about a great deal more anarchy and misery in Palestine and Syria than he would have done if he had resolutely held to his rule over those countries. In Tutankhamun's time, a certain measure of peace prevailed in Palestine, but the country was still independent of Egypt. It was possible, but not yet certain, that a considerable amount of disturbance was then being caused in Palestine by the entry of the Hebrews into the Promised Land. His own opinion was that the exodus from Egypt took place at least 2 centuries before Tutankhamun's time. The Hittites were among the interesting neighbors of Egypt, and it had been recently discovered that these people used a language which was probably an Indo-European language, closely connected with Latin. The Greeks at the time were in the heroic age. The Greek civilization of this period was the greatest contemporary with that of Egypt. Egypt and Minoan Greece were the 2 great centers of culture, and their relations were possibly more intimate than had hitherto been supposed. It was quite possible that the artistic freedom of Akhenaten's revolution in art, as well as in religion, was very considerably influenced by the artistic freedom of the contemporary Greece of Minoan days.